Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibilityman. We are committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Patrice Borders. She is an attorney, workplace consultant, transformational coach, and the founder of Amplify EI. She is informed by her training in employment law and emotional intelligence. Her specialties include providing leaders with techniques from the neurosciences that help them manage their personal stress, improve workplace cultures, form successful teams, and promote best practices to achieve their company's mission and productivity. Patrice Borders, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to explore possibilities with you as it relates to emotional intelligence. Thank you for the invitation.
Fantastic. I've been looking forward to talking with you for such a long time. I got a ton of questions. But first, a reminder to our listeners and our viewers, follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Your support matters and is appreciated, because in order to attract guests like Patrice Borders, we need those subscriptions to go up and up and up. Patrice, look, I got a ton of questions to ask you for sure. Now, this is the Possibility Action Network. We're all about possibility here. So I got to ask you, when you started high school, was the study of law something that was calling you?
Oh, wow. I didn't know we were going back that far, Stephen. But let me think back, because I just celebrated a significant anniversary with my fellow classmates. And I think at the time, the possibility was around creating a career that would allow me to have an impact, allow me to speak and advocate. So yes, practicing law and pursuing a law degree was something that was in my heart even back then.
I mean, that's high level thinking for high schoolers. A high schooler, someone wanted to make an impact. What kinds of things were you thinking about in high school? What type of leader were you?
Well, I was involved in our debate team and our drill team. And so I believe that I was, even then, a leader that looked at how could we include everyone, finding space for everyone to feel like they could share their voice, their opinion. And so I think even in the early years, as I think about even what my model was in my yearbook around to whom much is given, much is expected, the assumption was everyone has something to contribute.
Something was in your heart even back then. That's amazing. And, I'm also curious about your consulting firm, Amplify EI. At what point were you drawn to this, this name for your consulting firm?
Okay. Well, I started my own consulting business 22 years ago, and I started under the name Prevention Strategies. And as I get more into my work, which is really focused on how do I help leaders and organizations really transform into their best versions, and how do I help them lead in ways that are resonant with other people. And so as I do my executive coaching, as I do my training, those skills around how we connect, how we collaborate, were always a part of the conversation. And so emotional intelligence was always how I helped deliver the tools for transformation. And it just became very clear to me that I would lead with my name, Prevention Strategies, but as I explained what I did, I would talk about emotional intelligence. And it just became more evident that Amplify EI, which was a hashtag that I had started using, really was just a better complement. And so it was April of this year that I officially presented my outward facing brand as Amplify EI. And I guess I will soon be going by the name of the Emotional Intelligence Amplifier. So,
Wow.
like you, the possibilities man, right? So I'll be
Yeah.
the Emotional Intelligence Amplifier.
I love it. Amplify EI. I love it. In fact, Patrice, when I saw emotional intelligence around your bio, I knew I had to talk with you. And listen, a lot of people talking about AI today, artificial intelligence, but you are, I hope this is appropriate, you are the queen of emotional intelligence. So what is that? What is emotional intelligence?
Okay. So emotional intelligence is a way of describing those skill sets that enable individuals to be in touch with what they're feeling, in touch with the emotions of others, to be able to discern what you see and understand about what you're thinking and feeling, and then using that information to show up with choice in the words that you use, the behaviors that you exhibit, and the way that you interact with others. It is really about our capacity to be tapped into and have a deeper understanding and a capacity to regulate and monitor how we show up in spaces so that we can build better relationships, lead more effectively, and really create cultures where people feel like they belong.
I love that. And I love the way you articulated it. You say that it's not like we're going to find it. You say we have the capacity to better relate to each other as human beings. It's inborn. So,
and we can increase it. That is one of the things that really drew me to the content around emotional intelligence, is that we can practice it, we can learn it, we can grow it. And so we can, as you said, have the capacity to really show up more emotionally intelligent as we lead organizations and influence spaces where we're a part of.
I love it. I love it. And we're going to talk about companies and organizations in a moment. But first, I had this just occurred to me. Can EI, emotional intelligence, benefit families and nonprofits?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about those core skills, Stephen, that are distinguish someone who brings technical competence to the table. These are the skills that make us want to work with someone, make us want to be a teammate to someone, make us want to go and get advice from someone, right? These are the skills that really magnetize people to you, right? That's why we talk about them really enhancing the capacity for someone to be a resonant leader, where there is a connection. So sometimes, not my favorite way of describing it, they might be called soft skills, right? These are the skills that help increase the sense of trust, help exude trustworthiness. These are the skills that convey our authenticity, our vulnerability. And these are the skills that really are the ones that, when we think about the best leaders we've ever had, these are the skills that top the list.
Yeah. It sounds like, you're calling out the kinds of things that we learned maybe in kindergarten, how to treat one another, how to be kind, how to apologize if you're injured. That is, are you calling forth our higher angels?
Oh, wow. That is a great way of describing it. But I often reference that Robert Fulghum poem, right? Everything we ever really needed to know, we learned in kindergarten. When I talk about the basic concepts that are a part of my way of talking about emotional intelligence, it's about being present. It's about being right here in the moment with the conversations that you're having with the people right in front of you, right? Not being distracted. It's about making sure I come to the conversation having some self-awareness and understanding how what I might say or do might impact, for example, you as we engage in this conversation. And then do I bring a sense of care and sincerity to how I build the relationships with the people who I work with or who are in my home or in the space where I live, right? So it's all of those skills that enable me to have a more human-centric way of interacting and connecting. But we know that human-centric, coupled with the competencies around the things that I might, be hired for, the combination of those really are what excel people and in corporations and in organizations.
What I also like about you, Patrice, as a professional, someone trained in the law, is that you're moving, because you could really be highly legalistic and only talk about, statutes and ordinances, but you ask people to look at, self-awareness, at consciousness, at just a number of things. In fact, and I don't want to overtalk here, but it kind of reminds me of some medical professionals, who are talking more about just the science of health, but those who are talking about proper nutrition and the like. So you are clearly a pioneer for me. I just wanted to throw it out there as I listen to you. But I want to ask you, why take this? Why take EI to companies and organizations? Is there why for you?
Absolutely. What we want really is to have individuals who are thriving, right? When we are thinking about our work teams, we want them to be healthy. We want our work cultures to be reflective of spaces where people feel that sense of psychological safety, where they can come and be authentic and contribute at their highest levels. And so the why is really enabling people and empowering them with the tools to do that. And so it really gets down to those very fundamental skills. So, it's almost like the ABCs of how do I show up effectively in the workplace? And emotional intelligence is one of those. And when we look at any current research around the skills that are needed for the workplace of the future, emotional intelligence is listed as one of the top ones.
Wow. Yeah. You mentioned a word here. I just can't pass it up. You said psychological safety. And firstly, because some people may think, you just go to work. What's the big deal? Do people sometimes feel unsafe in the workplace?
Yes, Stephen, absolutely. And so we might not be talking about safety in terms of OSHA, right? That's not what we're talking about, but it's the safety that I would feel to raise my hand up in a team meeting and ask a question. It would be the safety that I would feel to say, I disagree with what you just said, or I have a different perspective on that, right? And that safety says that I can do that and not feel like I will be embarrassed or ostracized or might lose my job, right? It is a space that says, Patrice, we welcome your contribution and the unique perspective that you might offer. And so it is that type of safety that we're talking about. And emotional intelligence really does amplify that sense of safety.
Yeah, I like that because, just because someone is in a leadership position, we can't assume that this person automatically knows about leadership. And sometimes what you're saying is that some people can be taught to help develop their skills as leaders. Is it about right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's just amazing because, you could be in a room, right? And someone could have a thought, an idea that could really transform the company. But if they feel that they don't have a voice, then that genius simply dies with them in that room. And what you're doing is telling leaders, look, be attentive. I love it.
Absolutely. So what I do is twofold. I help give the individual those tools that they need, but also those that are shaping the culture to understand how they lead those meetings, how they interact in those meetings really do create that sense of safety or not. So it's the organization and the culture of the organization and the individual.
Yeah, I love it. But you're also saying that leaders have a responsibility, right? If you're in a leadership position, let me ask the question differently. Do leaders have a responsibility to draw out the best in their employees?
I say yes. Yes, they do. And I think that is driven also by the culture. Just as you said, that bright idea that might solve the dilemma that we're faced never gets aired because the person doesn't feel safe. an organization that is consistently happening time and time again is not going to be an organization that is going to be thriving financially in the long run, right? If you're not being competitive. So we can absolutely identify the business case for it, but also the case where it makes sense to ensure that you have a culture that people want to work in. You know, we saw the great exodus, the great resignation, or the great alignment, right? Where people were saying, hey, this is a place where I spend a lot of my time. Is this a place where I feel like I can really thrive? Does it align with my values? Does it align with the things that I need in order to show up in an authentic way? And it takes energy away from my effectiveness and my focus on the work when I'm focused on whether or not I'm safe or not.
Yeah. Okay. I want to look at challenges and opportunities of leadership. And first, I want to do challenges. What are some of the challenges that leaders face today in this fast-paced 21st century world of ours?
I would think from my personal experience, what I've seen time and time again is the capacity to create a space for looking at the whole person, right? So creating a work culture that honors the whole person, the whole human being. And so it's not just a person that comes to complete a task, but it's a human being that has a life, that has a purpose, that has a meaning, and has their own why. And so one of the primary skill sets that I love to focus on is how are you connecting with your people? Do your people know who you are? And so I think one of the key skill sets of a leader is the capacity to connect. And it's through those connections that you're able to truly inspire. And that is inspiring the best out of others.
It's a lot like, and what I'm hearing is like, it's a lot like a leader can also cultivate other leaders by example. So yeah. Well, so what are some of the opportunities, you know, in this high, fast-paced 21st century world that leaders have?
Well, let me just go back because you mentioned artificial intelligence, and we know that artificial intelligence is going to transform the way that we see workplaces right now, that there's going to be the need to upskill. There's going to be the need to communicate to large numbers of people that the way that they've been working is going to change. So I think one of the hugest opportunities is how can leaders bring on the necessary levels of empathy to ensure that they are able to shepherd people through these undeniable changes that we are facing. You know, the capacity to inspire people to embrace a growth mindset for the new things that they will need to learn, and to have the capacity to get in there and try something and maybe fail and then, you know, try again, right? And the leaders will need that skill of empathy to tap in and really connect with people where they are.
Yeah, gosh. Leadership and authentic connections. This is a new way of thinking here, because sometimes people could think the leaders should be detached, but I think you're suggesting something else here.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me ask you now, much of your work, not much of your work, I don't want to quantify it, but your work is informed by what you've called, and correct me if I got it wrong, the modern neuroscience.
Yes.
How does the neurosciences or modern neuroscience impact your work and inform your work?
Okay. Well, I love to connect the messages that I deliver through my executive coaching and through my facilitated learning experiences. I like to connect it to the science and the research so that we understand the importance and also the validity of what we're talking about. Because I talk about emotional intelligence, I want people to understand that the way that we show up very often has some programming that we don't always control on some unconscious levels. And so when I talk about the need for us to pause and process and pick how we might show up in some circumstances, the whole need to pause, is really driven by modern neuroscience, because we know that we are very often very distracted, that there are things that pull our attention. There's this world that we might consider, and many have referred to it as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? And things are always changing and very dynamic. And then we carry that referential mind around, where we have that ongoing internal conversation with ourselves, where we're constantly evaluating what we said and how we said it, right? So we have those two things colliding, and very often we are distracted. There is research from Harvard that says about 50% of the time, our attention and our minds and what we're thinking is somewhere else other than where our bodies are. And so I want people to understand, when I say that pause is critical, that there's neuroscience around why it's happening and why we need to bring more intention to the fact that, oh, let me slow down. So one of the things that I incorporate very often, Stephen, when I begin a coaching session, is a minute to arrive, simply to invite the pause in a very intentional way.
Wow, I think that's amazing, especially coming from someone trained in the law, because leaders. Well, I guess one-on-one, a leader would admit that they are human, but perhaps in a group setting, that a leader may. Do you see that? Are leaders more willing to admit to you that they're human beings? Because that's what you're talking about, a human being. Recognize, well, I got that voice in my head. It's not always friendly. But in a group setting, right, a leader cannot do that. How do you help leaders navigate that? How to be, open, and then when to not be as open?
Okay. That's a great one. The research continues to support that I will follow you as a leader if I feel like I know you, if I feel connected to you, if I feel like I understand who you are as a human being. And there is this thing that happens when we share our personal story, when we share and live in our values and share that information with others, that we connect at a deeper level. I trust you. I understand you. I see you as I see myself as a human being. And yes, there are very often times where we have to practice and understand how to show up authentically, which I believe is a core element too of being emotionally intelligent. So I have a wonderful exercise that I do very often around defining moments. And I'll ask leaders that I'm coaching to talk about moments in their lifetime that have defined who they are and helped shape the values that they show up with, and how they build relationships, how they build trust, and how they work with others. And so then we distill some of those stories into snippets that they become comfortable sharing with others. Just a little bit of who I am, just the gift of expressing something authentic about maybe why I have a core value around integrity, or why love is a core value of mine. And giving someone a nugget like that, they walk away like knowing you a little bit below the surface than just a hi, how are you? What did you do this weekend, right? Which are all great ways that we stay connected. But to give someone a sense of what anchors you through your values gives them a deeper look into who you are as a human being.
Yeah. I see how you can help an organization or company, show that their people can be human without necessarily them thinking that a human interaction has to be like a therapy interaction, because there are two things. Let me make sure that you understand, because I do want you to comment on this, attorney. So what I'm saying is that we are human beings, and as a human being, we face human stuff, and the leader can act as if he or she does not. But at the same time, I can see someone say, "Wait a minute, now I can be human, but I don't want to make it a therapy session." Do you see what I'm saying? How do you stay? How do you stay human without going too far in the other direction?
Okay. I'll go back to the word empathy. And empathy is about really connecting with and feeling with others. I think what inspires empathy is the sense of curiosity, which I think even drives the reason why we're talking today, right? I know we've got our fellow the Ohio State Buckeye thing in common, but you had some curiosity about the work that I do, how I have linked and connected the dots between an employment law career with talking about and coaching and doing keynotes around emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so that curiosity is a powerful way of ensuring that we connect with others. We validate someone's story, we validate their existence when we bring curiosity about what inspires them, who they are. And so the curiosity that then gives birth to that empathy, I think, is that special power that we can bring to ensure that I show up human and I invite your humanness as well.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, and you mentioned that, I think it was maybe 1 minute. I took 5 minutes earlier today, but took 5 minutes. So that's the next thing. So when did you, as a attorney, I guess keep saying that because sometimes people train in some of the professions are not open. So when it seems to me that mindfulness shows up in your work, and you've already talked about it without throwing out the word mindfulness. So how did this show up for you, and where were you drawn to this and why?
Well, I have a very personal story where I had the moment that I needed to live differently. I needed to show up differently. And it was a moment where I realized that I had been very absent from interaction with our then toddler daughters, right? And I realized I wasn't present. I missed the whole moment. And I thought, I need to do better. And so it was that personal conviction around doing better that led me to deepening my practice around being mindful, which to me, in its most basic terms, is creating a muscle around my attention, being able to know where it is, being able to pull it back when I know that it has wandered off, because I'm human and it will wander, right? So being able to strengthen that capacity to have more control over and more access to understanding my attention. And who, particularly, I think you're getting at my audience of lawyers, right? Who in the law would not want to make sure that I am fully present when I am giving advice to my client, that I am fully engaged when I am advocating on behalf of my client, right? The capacity to be mindful is my capacity to be fully present and centered. So when we talk about it as a skill set in that manner versus where we might get lost in the history of mindfulness. Many might connect it to what I jokingly call a granola crunching type of experience where you're seated with your folded legs on a mat, right? It is the mindfulness that we bring into the boardroom, the mindfulness that we bring into the next meeting or conversation that I am really focused on empowering people to have more capacity to manage.
Is that one of the ways you help leaders? Because, I've read about you and listened to you on social media, you help leaders manage their personal stress. Is that one of the ways that you help them manage their stress in their lives?
Yeah, I think that yes. Mm-hmm. When we are more mindful, when we are more present, we're happier. Mm-hmm. We are happier people. The research tells us that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. When I am focused on what I'm doing in the moment and I am present for it, I'm a happier person. I'm a happier leader. And we know emotions are contagious, Stephen. And so if I come into a meeting or if I'm leading a session and I'm a happier person, happy begets more happy.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So how do you help leaders manage conflict in the workplace? I mean, even the conflict that are underneath the surface, you can't always see it. How do you help them identify and manage them in a way, of course, from the perspective of emotional intelligence?
Okay. So I'm assuming at some point we'll talk about my 7 keys to emotional intelligence.
Yes, indeed. That's coming.
Okay. So one of the keys that I focus on unlocking through emotional intelligence is the capacity to navigate conflict. And when we are able to navigate conflict, I come with a deepened awareness of the things that might activate me, the things that might annoy me, the things that might heat me up a bit. On a personal note, I know that integrity, and when it's questioned, is something that takes me from 0 to 100. So when we know that about ourselves, those things that might really get under our skin, like potentially being ignored in a meeting, being asked to deliver something on a timeline that's really unrealistic, being unappreciated in the workplace, being talked over, right? Some of those things are very common activators for getting us into spaces where we feel a bit of conflict. And so first is, do I have the self-awareness? And then second, going back to the pause, do I have the skills and the tools that say, oh, push pause, right? Because generally when we're in conflict, the first thing that comes to our mind is probably going to sound maybe defensive. The second thing that comes to our mind is probably going to sound a little accusatory. So if we're able to pause and give ourselves some space, that third thing, right, is probably the thing that we should lead with, which is probably more focused on, let me understand, which goes back to curiosity and empathy. Let me understand your perspective. Yeah. Give me a little bit more information, so that we can understand each other, which doesn't mean we have to agree, but then we can get to resolution and or solution.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I can see we have the capacity, but we may not always have the tools to pull those things out. So good. So there's something else that I just want to touch upon in terms of managing conflicts. Does your work touch upon the book Nonviolent Communication? That was really, I mean, it's still pretty big, nonviolent communication, but it was really pretty big back in the day. Does it touch upon that kind of thing? Language and how do we use language and how that may foster conflict or somehow, reduce conflicts in the workplace? Okay.
So one of the emotionally intelligent things I teach is about being self-aware. So I am not aware of that book. So I want to be clear with the disclaimer so that I'm not sure exactly what's referenced in the book. But when you talk about language as a tool, I will say yes. So the 7 keys to emotional intelligence focus on our intrapersonal and our interpersonal ways of showing up. And language plays a big part of that. Even the language that I'm able to use to understand what I'm feeling, right? The language that enables me to have greater self-awareness and to comprehend myself matters, right? The language that I can use to help understand someone else and their perspective, absolutely. So the questions, the power of questions is an element of that. The capacity to have an evolved vocabulary around our emotions as well.
Yeah. I love it. Your response, you just taught the world, well, not the world, but well over 20,000 people are going to watch this recording, how these things work about, being authentic. You're just all authentic, you were vulnerable. Oh my gosh, you just taught me a lot there, Patrice Borders. Thank you for that. But you also share about emotionally intelligent behaviors, and this may be getting into those 7 keys, but I want to kind of separate it. What are some emotionally intelligent behaviors that you talk about and that you write about?
Okay. So one is, so I'll connect them to the 7 keys to make it simple. Okay. So the model that I've codified really focuses on 7 key competencies. So the first 2 are more intrapersonal, how I am in relationship to myself. So when we think about behaviors, the first is being centered. And so the capacity, as I said, to simply pause, to simply take a deep breath in and out, to ensure that you are here now in this moment is powerful and should never be underestimated. And it's something that, of course, I could invite you in to do. And I know you said you did 5 minutes. So I took a minute before we began our conversation, but it is something that you can absolutely do without announcing it to the world or the person seated next to you, right? You can give yourself that capacity to check in with your thoughts, check in with the emotions, and really align with what's most important to you in that moment. And then the second key is comprehend, the capacity to increase self-awareness. And we should never dismiss the impact that a simple question to ourselves throughout the day can have, which is, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? Right? Checking in with yourself on that gives us valuable information. And then the next 4 keys are interpersonal. They focus on how do we connect with others and interact with others. And it starts with connection. And that gets back to, am I showing up authentic? Am I really bringing trust and trustworthiness forward so that I have a relationship that is meaningful with someone? And then how do I communicate? Am I able to create space, going back to psychological safety, where others feel like their different perspectives are invited and welcome? And then the same with collaboration. Am I doing that work to bring and lead with empathy to make sure that people feel seen, heard, and validated? And then conflict, as we just talked, do I know what heats me up? And do I have constructive ways and tools for addressing that? And then the final key, the 7th key, is the universal key, which is culture. And I believe that our collective behaviors, those behaviors that are allowed to persist and continue, create the culture that we're a part of. And so we own shaping culture, all of us.
I love it, Patrice. I tell you, I need to arrange for you to go to the United Nations and have a conversation with them about emotional intelligence. Let me ask you, why should leaders, and maybe should is not a good word, but I used it, why should the leaders care about, things like the well-being of their employees, or even inclusivity, an inclusive work environment? Why should a leader care about that?
It goes back to, there's the moral thing to do, the right thing to do, and there's the business thing to do. And they absolutely intersect when you ask the question, why should a leader care about the human being, about the employee, the whole person? Well, if I am going to come to the workplace and contribute and thrive at my highest levels, that sense of belonging and connection is what's going to invite me to do that. And if I come to a place where I don't feel that sense of belonging, and we can all go back and tap into what that feels like. When I feel a sense of belonging, I feel safe. I feel like I am, part of the group. I feel like I can share things. I feel welcome, right? I feel like I can, tell a joke. I can be my authentic self, right? All of those things that make me who I am. And when we don't do the work to have cultures like that, we lose some of the best that individuals can bring. So it's about having that space where people feel like they can belong because they're going to do their best work. You can look at any research from McKinsey to Deloitte, who share with us in quantifiable ways, those organizations that are more diverse are going to outperform those that are not. And so diversity is broad. It's the way I think. It's my cognitive diversity. It's my identity, elements of diversity. It's, all of that. And when I feel like I can truly be myself, I'm going to give my absolute best work. And emotional intelligence supports creating spaces of belonging.
Oh gosh, I just hear it just like you're saying to me. Look, it's possible for an organization to have a healthy workplace culture, and those are the kinds of things that you just mentioned are part of it. So let me ask you this question, maybe an odd question, but I got to ask: is it possible for a leader to recognize that they are presiding over a workplace that's not healthy, that's not doing well? What are some of the keys to that? To recognize, look, it's not going well. You got to do something about it.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yes. So what are the things that tell you that? When
Yeah.
people stop collaborating, right? When people start going to their colleagues and saying, "Hey, I'd love your input on this." When people stop trusting each other, you have issues. When people stop solving conflict, and conflict continues to get swept under the ground, under the carpet, right? When it continues to just be ignored, and it just then breeds greater resentment and greater resentment. And so when you have a culture where your leaders don't want to talk to each other, when you have a culture where they're no longer really connecting in ways that will enable you to get the work done quicker and faster, when there's a sense of, I have to protect my turf, right? When I feel like I have to come in and start with defensiveness, right? You have issues. Really, when those elements have truly broken down around how we connect, communicate, collaborate, and navigate conflict, that there are some unhealthy behaviors that are becoming norms.
I'm going to ask a question. It's rhetorical, but I want you to expand on it. My rhetorical question I'm asking is, who needs emotional intelligence? I'm going to answer it. Everyone, but I want you to expound on that for me.
Okay, absolutely, everyone. And it goes back to a quote from Aristotle that I like to reference, which is, wherever you go, there you are. So if I go to the grocery store, to the post office, or to a team meeting, I am there, right? The way I think, the way I process, the person that I am, the values that I have are going to show up there. And so everywhere we are, we could have a better interaction, a better impact when we lead with emotional intelligence. When I lead with the capacity to be centered and present, when I lead with self-awareness, right? So I know maybe when I am kind of charged up and energized, I'm reading the room and it's like, everybody hasn't had their morning matcha like I have, and I'm, already on a 100 with my cheeriness. I might need to dial it back just a minute, just a tad, until we all get there, right? So that I connect, right? That's self-awareness, right? So we all can use it. And then particularly when we talk about those interactions, if I am not connecting with you in a way that you feel seen and heard, right? All of those elements, then I'm not really doing the work of leading with emotional intelligence.
In my introduction, I mentioned that you are an attorney, consultant, a coach. I need to add that you're also a philosopher. Yeah, but look, I know that you've contributed to at least one book, maybe you've contributed to others, Micro Shift, Small Mindset Changes for Big Results. Firstly, why did you collaborate on this book? And then tell us about your contribution to your part, the section that you wrote.
Okay. Well, I love working with brilliant women. And so there were 5 other brilliant coaches who came together to create the Micro Shift book. And so it was an awesome time to just be in the community of wonderful, brilliant people, because we know, right? It sharpens, right, each other, right? We just get better. So it was an opportunity to learn and grow with these wonderful executive coaches. So the chapter that I contributed, it was focused on resilience connected with self-confidence, resilience connected with self-compassion. And I believe when we're able to practice self-compassion, when we're able to show ourselves the kind of kindness that we would show a friend in moments of distress or failure, then we can grow exponentially. And very often we have a mindset that tough love is the thing that we need to power through and to get through. And so I really wanted to dedicate that chapter to elevate how impactful self-compassion can be to allow us to grow and be prepared to bounce back.
Wow. Resilience, self-compassion. What prompted, I mean, those are powerful words. What grew those in you? If you don't mind sharing with us. I mean, because everyone doesn't talk about resilience, everyone doesn't talk about self-compassion, but you do. Why?
Because it is incredibly powerful. And because, as I shared with you, one of the exercises I do is around defining moments. And when I think about my own personal defining moments, I think about how my resilience origin stories really have framed how I show up. A core value around really bringing that self-compassion forward. There was a message that my mother used to always say is, treat yourself well, love yourself. And so when we would have our check-in, she would say, how are you treating yourself? Wow. And so having a sense of regard for yourself and having the capacity to truly love yourself means even in those moments of failure, you're able to say, wow, this is tough. This didn't go the way you wanted it to.
Yeah.
And not a but you're okay. You're doing the best that you can. And that is a voice of self-compassion. And I will tell you, making it through law school, navigating, starting a business, in partnership with my husband, raising a family, there are many moments, right, that you need to have that voice of self-compassion.
Yeah.
And there's a quote that says, the only way we can avoid failure is to never do anything, say anything, or be anything. And I planned to do, say, and be something. And so failure is inevitable.
That's so wonderful. It's you're certainly a force for good in the world. So many people are going to look at you and hear you and just be emboldened, by what you share. I think it's a beautiful thing for professionals to be out there talking authentically about the kinds of things that you talk about. So I got to say, how can I frame this question? Because, I'm going to end with this one. And no, I got one more. Okay. But this whole notion about inclusivity is that I just love the way that you talk about it. And it's like everyone wants this, So how did you come to this way of speaking about inclusivity, diversity? We can all be better and grow better. How did it just one day show up for you in your life? If my question isn't clear, then ask me a question, because I'm after something. It's like something showed up for you, and I'm trying to figure out, was it a spiritual transformation? Was it just one of those profound insights that just hit her one day? And how did this show up for you?
Okay. I think I understand the question. And it's what inspires me to do what I do. And I think what inspires me is that I have lived authentically in teams that have been diverse by design. And I understand that you have to bring intention to see the whole person. Yeah. To have a healthy team, to get to healthy results. Now, I will tell you, I have been on teams where we will post and have posted exceptional outcomes, but then you're stepping over the bodies that have fallen, as you go to get the prize. And what I realize is we can still go and get the prize, and everyone can stand on the platform if we do things in a way that creates that sense of belonging. So that is how I have brought it to the workplace. Mm-hmm. On a personal note, Stephen, I am 5 of 5 in my family. And so growing up, I was the youngest. And so I had 4 wonderful older sisters, and they all intentionally, and sometimes with the prodding of my mom and dad, right, included me. And so I know what it feels like to be included. And I also know what it feels like to be excluded. I will tell you, I had just a soul-crushing moment when I was in elementary school, and I wanted to play softball. And I had gotten a wonderful new red glove. And I went out, we were trying out, and I was out in the outfield, and I was running from the ball, not to it, to catch it. And so I remember the coach saying, "Hey, you don't need to come back." And I was crushed, right? And so I know that sense of not belonging, and what that feels like as I watched my friends, come and play and have a wonderful and fun season, and I wasn't a part of it. I mean, I realized, okay, softball isn't my thing. But then, what I knew is that I just did not belong. And so when we have those understandings and we couple that with empathy, it really can show up in our values. So a strong value for me is creating spaces where people feel like they belong. And then I know the research, as I've already shared, right? We just are better when we have that sense of belonging. We do better work.
That's great, Patrice. And I hope that anyone listening to this or watching this caught this. I asked the question. It was a bit convoluted, but Patrice didn't answer it by saying, "Oh, you're an idiot," or "I don't know what you mean," or a number of ways to put me down. But she said, "I get the question. It is, you're asking me what inspires me." That's an example of emotional intelligence from my perspective. Patrice, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. But before I go, though, is there anything else you care to share that I didn't ask you already?
Well, absolutely. I would love, because you asked the question, who should get deeper information and understanding, who can benefit from emotional intelligence? And it was your rhetorical question, and everyone. I would love for everyone who is listening to come and visit my website to see how we might connect so that we together can amplify emotional intelligence, either one-on-one, as an executive coach, or with a cohort from your organization, or as a keynote to talk about those 7 keys to emotional intelligence. And I have partnered with one of the leading technology transformational organizations around creating learning in online platforms to bring to life my 7 keys through a online micro learning series called The 7 Keys to Healthy Teams. And so I'd love for you to visit me at www.amplifyei, that's amplifyei.com, and fill out a form so that we can continue the conversation and really figure out how we can amplify emotional intelligence together. And Stephen, I have a newsletter that I think is how we got connected. You started reading my newsletter on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter, Amplify Emotional Intelligence, where twice a month I land in and just really share my insights, tools, strategies, practical ways to think about how you can amplify emotional intelligence in your everyday life. And so I think popping in and following and subscribing to that newsletter would be another wonderful way for me to stay connected with your listeners as well, Stephen.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you once again for being with us, Patrice.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Patrice Borders. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day